Hello, thank you for joining me as I read some more of my book, Revelation. London. Anthony left to go into London to meet with David Farina about finding Akashi. Little does Anthony know, but David has plans of his own for the contract. David is a specialist in archaeology. He was born into a very strict Catholic family. Mr. Farina is not what most people would say is handsome. He is a little on the slim side. He has curly black hair and brown eyes. He stands about 5 foot 10 inches. David was chosen to become a white warlock by a priest. David was born in April of the year 989 AD. His mother told him that he was born in the year of the peace of God. He has always done whatever he could for the light and was next in line to become an Akashi guardian before he was turned. Each month, the white witches and warlocks hand off Akashi to another team. After guarding the contract, all white witches and warlocks go through a cleansing ceremony. Just being in the presence of Akashi for even a few minutes or weeks can drain many years of life from even the most powerful among them. Everything changed for him when he was forced to become a vampire by Gabriel Dubois, one of the first vampires. Gabriel's maker was Cyrus, the first Dark One. David had been following the trail of Akashi ever since. He is always very careful not to bring any suspicion upon himself. Playing both sides is something that David has become very good at. Gabriel made David a vampire just to find the location of the contract, not really realizing how powerful David had become because he was now a vampire warlock. He hides his great powers from all of the Dark Ones. When David was compelled by Gabriel to tell him where the contract was being held, he could not disobey his maker. Gabriel used his power of persuasion on a peasant to put a potion into the guardian's food. When Gabriel snuck into the small dwelling where they were hiding, there was a fierce battle. Both white warlocks were killed along with Gabriel. The white witch was able to get away with Akashi, but she was severely injured. David knew of Gabriel's plans. The potion that he gave to the guardian to spike their food was just powdered brown sugar. He wanted Gabriel to die, but he could not kill his own maker. He did feel bad about the deaths of the two white warlocks. He convinced himself that people die in war. David always seemed to know where Akashi would turn up next. There have only been 3 vampire warlocks and 1 vampire witch in history. The 2 other warlocks have been killed. David has met Saber Isidore only once, and once was more than enough for anyone. Saber Isidore is a dark witch when she was turned. She was turned by a young rogue vampire in 1727. She is not very attractive. She has limp brown hair and brown eyes. She is short and stocky, not fat but muscular. She grew up on a small rabbit farm on the outskirts of Askut, Egypt. Sabra was still helping her family with the farm after she became a dark witch. She was never any good at using spells. She almost always had to use potions. Potions are very hard to use because you must get the person to eat or drink it before it will work. Unlike David, Sabra was happy to become a vampire. Once she learned how to use her powers of persuasion, she had one man kill her own maker. After that, she left Egypt and was never looked back. Her life became everything she could never have before. She used her powers of persuasion on men to get money, homes, and jewelry. Men were lining up to be near Sabra. Women were always left wondering how she could get any man she wanted. Most warlocks were very happy that persuasion did not work on them when Sabra was around. The world was lucky that Sabra was not smart enough to understand her true potential, because she was only interested in fulfilling her own selfish needs. David always uses Sabra to make all of his potions for him, because no one in the world was better at making potions than Sabra, and she always kept the secret. Anthony could hardly wait to find out what information David had on Akashi's whereabouts. The Regent in Piccadilly Square is where David chose to meet with Anthony. David still loved eating a wonderful meal in a fine establishment. Popular with the upper class, the Regent was a grand and gilded cavern with neo-Byzantine architecture. Due to its flawless service, it was visited by hosts of celebrities, politicians, and even members of the royal family. Anthony reserved the very best table for their meeting. While waiting, he sipped on a glass of brandy and enjoyed a fine cigar. Once David walked into the restaurant, the host announced, "Ah, Mr. Farina, your table is ready." The host clapped his hands, and an attendant hurried over and walked him to the table. As soon as David was seated, Anthony asked, "So, David, what have you found out?" David shook his head in disbelief. "Well, at least let me order a drink," David replied with a hint of disdain. The waiter handed each of them menus. Anthony ordered another drink, and David asked for the best bottle of wine they had. The waiter brought a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon and a wine glass along with Anthony's drink. He pulled out the cork and handed it to David. He sniffed it and nodded his head in approval. Another waiter walked up and began to tell them of the chef's specials. Chef Friesca recommends starting off with a Ramon heart salad. It is tossed with cannellini beans, garbanzos, spicy salami, radishes, sunflower seeds, tonto, and olive oil. David nodded his head as he sipped his wine. Anthony waved his hand to the waiter to get him to hurry up. For the main course, he recommends his duck gravas proventi. It is baked and then topped with caramelized red onions, golden raisin risotto, baby shiitake mushrooms, and a blood orange sauce. That sounds amazing. I will have both. Please tell the chef that David Farina has said that he's outdone himself this time. David put his fingers in his mouth and kissed with his fingerprints and made a sound. Mwah! The waiter looked over at Anthony and he said, "I shall have the same." The waiter bowed and walked back toward the kitchen. "Okay, now can you please tell me what you have found out?" "Well, I'm very close to finding the contract. Just last week, I had followed Akashi to Namango, Rwanda, but the day before I arrived, 32 young black men were burned to death. I was told they were killed for their refusal to renounce Christianity, but I feel they were sacrificed to keep Akashi from the Dark Ones. They were all pages of the court for the king, Mugwanda II of Burgundy," David explained. "So what? What do they have to do with Akashi?" Anthony replied with some aggravation. "I feel that the Light Ones are also using mortal Christians to help guard the contract. If this is true, we will have to find different methods of searching for Akashi." David stopped talking when the waiter walked back to the table with a large tray. The waiter opened a tray stand and set his tray onto it. He placed the salads on the table in front of them. He also placed a basket of hot rolls and a small butter dish in the center of the table. Another waiter came over to take Anthony's empty glass to refill. Anthony placed his hand over his glass and said, "Bring me a glass so I also enjoy some wine." The waiter nodded and walked off. "What methods are you talking about, David?" Anthony inquired. "I haven't really had time to think about that yet, Anthony, since it just happened," David answered with a hint of sarcasm. The waiter came back with a glass of wine for Anthony and filled it with wine and set it down next to his salad. "Anthony, eat some of your salad. It is wonderful," David suggested. Anthony took a few bites and was very glad he did. David ate his salad, and they all had time. They had all the time in the world, and Anthony was always disliked about him. He could never understand how David could ever finish anything because he always took his time with everything that he was involved in. But to Anthony's amazement, David always finished everything he had ever started, as as far as he knew anyway. Another waiter walked up to the table and took the empty salad bowls, just as another brought out the main course. He set a plate of duck in front of David. "Oh my, I can hardly wait to taste this." Anthony has never seen a vampire that enjoyed eating real food as much as David. "I'm glad that you're enjoying your time in London, David," Anthony said as the waiter placed his plate down in front of him. "I always enjoy London, Anthony." David gave out a low laugh. "Who do you think killed those pages?" Anthony inquired. "I do not know for sure. I have some of my best people looking into this," David answered with certainty. "I heard Osiris might be close to finding Akashi." Anthony probed David for a reaction. "Really? I have not heard anything about Osiris looking for the contract," David answered with a straight face, throwing Anthony off the trail. David took a sip of wine and a few more bites of his dinner. "I was told 3 vampires and a dark witch were the ones that attacked the white ones in Uganda. 2 of the vampires were trapped inside the mud house, and they had snuck into to retrieve Akashi. When the people of the village found out the vampires were inside the hut, they burned it to the ground. The vampires burned to death, but not from the fire, but from the sun when they ran outside to escape it. I also feel that the light will more than likely keep the contract somewhere in Africa," David revealed. "Why would they do that?" Anthony asked. "There's more Christians in Africa than almost anywhere in the world. And if I'm right, that means more of them to assist the Guardians with Akashi," David explained. "So we need more dark ones looking for the contract," Anthony suggested. "No, just the right ones," David replied. Thank you for joining me as I read some more of my story, and I hope that you'll join me next week. I'm sorry that it took me so long, but I had been ill, and I'm finally feeling better, and I didn't want to read with my voice all cracking and everything. So thank you for joining me.